Right now, as you listen to this, you are not in control. Not fully. The thought you just had, the one where you said to yourself, "That's ridiculous, of course I'm in control," that thought was not the beginning of your reaction. Your brain had already begun reacting nearly half a second before you became conscious of it. That is not a philosophical argument. That is a measured, reproducible scientific fact that has now been replicated in laboratories across the world for over 40 years. Here is something more unsettling. The platforms you scroll through every single day, the ones you check first thing in the morning before you even get out of bed, were built by neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and machine learning engineers whose sole professional purpose was to figure out exactly how your brain works, and then use that knowledge to make it nearly impossible for you to stop. And the corporations that sell you products, the governments that want your vote, the political movements that want your allegiance, the media organizations that want your outrage, all of them now have access to tools so precise, so scientifically calibrated, that the propaganda techniques of the 20th century look like children drawing with crayons by comparison. So, who controls your mind? That is not a rhetorical question. In 2025, the average human being checks their phone 352 times every single day. That is once every 2.5 minutes during every waking hour of every single day. Most of those people will tell you they chose to do that. They are wrong. In 2024, a peer-reviewed study published in a major psychiatric journal found that 69% of adults and 81% of teenagers report feeling anxious when they cannot check their social media. They are not anxious because something is wrong in their lives. They are anxious because the platforms they use were specifically engineered to create exactly that anxiety. The engineers who built those platforms knew this was happening. They had the internal data. They chose to keep going anyway. This documentary is not about social media addiction in the way you have heard the term before. This is something far larger, far older, and far more systematically disturbing. This is about the complete and total architecture of influence that surrounds every human being alive today. The neuroscience of how your brain can be hijacked. The psychology of how your beliefs can be engineered. The economics of who profits from your distraction. And the technology that has now made all of this faster, cheaper, and more powerful than at any point in the entire history of civilization. We are going to go deep. We are going to start where everything starts, inside your brain. We are going to understand the machinery before we understand how it is being used against you. Because the people who want to control your mind have studied that machinery with extraordinary precision, and the only way to protect yourself is to understand it at least as well as they do. Part 1. The machine inside your head. Let us begin with a number. 100 billion. That is roughly the number of neurons in a single human brain. Each of those neurons can form connections with up to 10,000 other neurons, which means the theoretical number of possible neural connections in your brain exceeds the number of atoms in the known observable universe. Your brain is the most complex object that science has ever encountered or attempted to describe. And yet, For all of that astonishing complexity, the vast majority of your thinking, your deciding, your feeling, and your reacting happens not in the bright, conscious, deliberate part of your mind, the part that feels like you, but in the deep, ancient, automatic machinery that runs almost entirely beneath your awareness. Cognitive scientists and neuroscientists estimate that somewhere between 90 and 95% of human cognition is unconscious. 90 to 95%. That means the mind you experience as yourself, the voice in your head that seems to be running the show, making the choices, forming the opinions, is responsible for perhaps 5 to 10% of what your brain actually does every second. Think about what that means. You are, in large part, a passenger in a vehicle that you believe you're driving. The car is going somewhere, and you're watching through the window and narrating the journey as though you chose the destination, as though you're turning the wheel, as though all of it is deliberate and chosen. But the vehicle has its own logic, its own older programming, its own set of rules and priorities that were shaped long before you were born. This is not a new idea. Sigmund Freud spent his entire career arguing that the unconscious mind was the dominant force in human behavior, though his specific theories have largely been superseded by modern neuroscience. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, writing in the early 19th century, argued that human beings rationalize their actions after the fact rather than genuinely reasoning before them. What is new is that we now have the instruments to measure this directly. We can watch it happen inside the brain in real time. The most famous experiment in this entire field was conducted by a neuroscientist named Benjamin Libet in 1983. Libet's experiment was disarmingly simple. He asked participants to flex their wrist whenever they felt the urge to do so, completely voluntarily, completely spontaneously, whenever they wanted. He monitored their brain activity with an EEG machine while they did this. He also asked them to watch the position of a clock hand and note the exact moment when they first felt the conscious intention to move. What Libet found shook the scientific community and has continued to provoke intense debate ever since. The brain's readiness potential, the electrical activity that precedes voluntary movement, began approximately 550 milliseconds before the movement itself. The participants' own reported awareness of the intention to move came only about 200 milliseconds before the action. The brain had already begun preparing the movement roughly 350 milliseconds before the person became consciously aware of any intention to move. In other words, the brain decided before you decided. Now, to be scientifically precise, this finding has been debated, reinterpreted, and refined significantly in the decades since Libet published it. Subsequent research, using more sophisticated tools, has complicated the picture. Some neuroscientists argue that what Libet measured was not actually a predecision, but rather a kind of neural noise, a fluctuating baseline of brain activity. And that consciousness plays a role in filtering and finalizing that activity, rather than being bypassed entirely. Patrick Haggard of University College London, one of the world's leading researchers on the neuroscience of volition, has written that the conscious will retain a kind of veto power, what some researchers have called free won't, the ability to stop an action even if the preparation for it has already begun unconsciously. But here is what is not disputed. A very large portion of your mental life, your reactions, your emotional responses, your snap judgments, your impulses, your prejudices, your desires are generated below the level of conscious awareness and then presented to your conscious mind as though they were the result of conscious deliberation. Your brain generates the experience, and then your conscious self writes the story of why. Neuroscientist and author Sam Harris has argued this position forcefully, writing that thoughts simply arise in the brain, that we do not generate them, we experience them, the way we experience anything external. We did not choose to feel hungry just now. We did not choose to suddenly remember a conversation from 3 weeks ago. We did not choose the associations that a particular smell triggers in us. These things arise, and then we construct a narrative that says, I thought of that, or I felt that, or I decided that. Why does this matter for the question of who controls your mind? Because anyone who wants to influence your behavior does not need to persuade your conscious mind. They need to manipulate the inputs to the unconscious processes that generate your desires, your impulses, your emotional reactions, your sense of familiarity, your sense of threat. They need to work not on the 5 to 10% of your cognition that you experience as yourself, but on the 90 to 95% that operates below your awareness and that your conscious mind then takes credit for. And that is precisely what the science of persuasion, the science of advertising, the science of propaganda, and the science of platform design has been doing with rapidly increasing precision for more than a century. The brain's reward system, the hijacking of dopamine. To understand how your mind is controlled, you need to understand one molecule: dopamine. Dopamine is one of the most important neurotransmitters in the human brain. It is synthesized in several regions, particularly in an area called the ventral tegmental area, and it acts on circuits throughout the brain, most importantly on the mesolimbic pathway, sometimes called the reward pathway, which connects the ventral tegmental area to the nucleus accumbens and the prefrontal cortex. This circuit is sometimes called, in simplified terms, the brain's reward system. Here is the crucial thing about dopamine that most people get wrong. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. It is the molecule of anticipation, of wanting, of seeking. The neuroscientist Wolfram Schultz and his colleagues established through decades of research what is now called the dopamine prediction error signal. Dopamine neurons fire strongly when you encounter an unexpected reward, when something better than expected happens. But if you receive a reward you fully expected, dopamine activity actually decreases rather than increasing. And if you expect a reward and do not receive it, dopamine activity drops significantly below its baseline level, which is experienced as a kind of craving, a frustration, a need. This system evolved over millions of years to motivate mammals to explore, to search, to seek. When the outcome is uncertain, when you don't know whether the next action will bring a reward or not, dopamine activity is sustained at high levels through the entire anticipatory period. This is why gambling is so neurologically compelling. It is not the winning that drives the compulsion, it is the uncertainty, the not knowing, the possibility. Now consider what variable reward schedules do in the brain. A variable reward schedule is exactly what it sounds like. A schedule on which rewards arrive unpredictably. Sometimes you get a reward, sometimes you don't. You don't know which it will be until you act. The behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner demonstrated in the mid-20th century that variable reward schedules produce the most persistent, most compulsive, most resistant to extinction behaviors of any reinforcement schedule he studied. Rats pressing levers for food pellets that arrive unpredictably will press those levers far more obsessively for far longer than rats receiving a food pellet every single time they press the lever. Predictability reduces compulsion. Uncertainty amplifies it. This is the foundational principle of the slot machine. You pull the lever and you don't know what you'll get. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes a small reward. Occasionally a big one. The uncertainty is not an accidental byproduct of the design. It is the design. The unpredictability is what makes it so hard to stop. And it is the foundational principle of social media. When you open Instagram or TikTok or Twitter or any platform built around a social feed, you do not know what you are going to see. You do not know if someone has liked your post. You do not know if someone has commented, replied, tagged you, sent you a message. You do not know if the next video will be boring or fascinating or hilarious or upsetting. The entire experience is a variable reward schedule of extraordinary sophistication. Every refresh, every scroll, every pull to refresh gesture is the equivalent of pulling the lever on a dopamine slot machine. Research published in 2024 examining brain activity in social media users found that TikTok's algorithm causes dopamine to spike when a funny video is followed by a serious political video. Precisely because the contrast is unexpected, precisely because it violates prediction. The same research found gamma wave activity increased by 62% compared to when participants viewed neutral content during high-reward moments. The brain is not passively receiving information. It is being actively stimulated by a system that was specifically designed to find and exploit its most fundamental biological drives. The research is also clear that this repeated stimulation has consequences for the brain's architecture itself. Frequent engagement with social media platforms alters dopamine pathways in ways that parallel the neurological changes seen in substance addiction, a pattern documented across multiple peer-reviewed studies published in recent years. Changes in brain activity within the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for planning, impulse control and rational decision-making, and the amygdala, the region responsible for emotional processing and threat detection, suggest that heavy social media use increases emotional sensitivity while simultaneously compromising the ability to make deliberate, reflective decisions. A study of 500 users over 6 months found that those who spent more than 2 hours per day scrolling showed a 35% drop in prefrontal impulse control, measured by decreases in beta wave variability, 35%, a measurable, quantifiable erosion of the very brain capacity that enables deliberate, intentional choice. And here is the deeper problem, the one that the platforms and their investors understood clearly long before most of the public did. When the dopamine system is chronically overstimulated, it adapts. It down-regulates. The number of dopamine receptors decreases, or their sensitivity decreases, in a process called desensitization or tolerance. This is exactly what happens in drug addiction. The brain requires more and more of the stimulus to produce the same response. Meanwhile, ordinary life, conversation with a friend, a walk in nature, a meal, a book, produces a comparatively muted dopamine response and feels flat, unstimulating, boring. This is dopamine desensitization, and it is happening on a civilizational scale. Dr. Anna Lemke, a professor of psychiatry at Stanford University and author of the book Dopamine Nation, has argued in extensive clinical research and public writing that the modern digital environment has created an epidemic of what she calls pleasure-pain imbalance, a state in which the brain's reward system has been so chronically overstimulated that its baseline has shifted, leaving people in a state of chronic low-level deprivation, craving and anxiety that they continually attempt to relieve by seeking more stimulation. The very act of seeking more stimulation, of course, deepens the problem rather than solving it. This is not metaphor. This is neurobiology. The brain of a heavy social media user, when examined with the tools of modern neuroscience, shows structural and functional changes that are recognizably similar to the brain of a person with substance use disorder. The same pathways, the same desensitization, the same prioritization of the addictive stimulus over other sources of value. And the people who built these platforms knew. Frances Haugen, the former Facebook employee who became one of the most significant corporate whistleblowers of the 21st century, released internal documents in 2021 that showed conclusively that Meta's researchers had identified the harmful effects of their platforms, particularly on adolescent girls, and that this information had been systematically suppressed and ignored by company leadership. The internal research showed that Instagram made body image problems worse for 1 in 3 teenage girls. The company knew. The company chose engagement over well-being, profit over health, time on platform over the psychological development of children. A 2024 Pew Research study found that 69% of adults and 81% of teenagers reported feeling anxious when unable to check social media. That anxiety is not a personal failing. It is not a weakness of character. It is the direct, documented, intended result of systems designed by teams of engineers, neuroscientists, and behavioral psychologists who understood exactly what they were building: the infinite scroll and the architecture of compulsion. The pull-to-refresh mechanism was invented by Lauren Brichter and first appeared in a Twitter client he developed called Tweety in 2009. The gesture was intended, Brichter later said in interviews, as a simple, satisfying way to update a feed, a natural mechanical metaphor, like pulling open a drawer. By 2012, the mechanism was everywhere. It is now one of the most universal interactions on any smartphone on Earth. Brichter has since said publicly that he regrets inventing it, that he knows what it became, that he finds it difficult to look at. What did it become? It became the lever on the slot machine. It became the embodied physical enactment of the dopamine-seeking compulsion that the platforms had been engineered to exploit. Every pull-to-refresh gesture is a prayer to the god of variable reward. Every swipe upward on an infinite scroll is one more turn of the wheel. The infinite scroll itself was patented by Asa Raskin in 2006 and subsequently adopted by virtually every major social platform. Its effect on the brain is straightforward and has now been extensively studied. Without natural stopping points, without the end of a page, the turn of a physical page, the conclusion of a chapter, the inhibitory mechanisms in the prefrontal cortex that allow you to decide, that's enough, I'll stop now, are never triggered. The research is consistent. Using infinite scrolling interfaces weakens inhibitory control in the prefrontal cortex, resulting in increased beta wave activity associated with compulsive continuation. Raskin, like Brichter, later expressed regret about his invention. He estimated that infinite scroll costs humanity roughly 200,000 hours of collective human attention every single day. These men were brilliant engineers. They were not evil. They built things that seemed elegant, that solved interface problems, that users loved. And then those things were weaponized, embedded into systems whose financial incentive structure rewarded maximum engagement above all other considerations. Systems operated by companies whose entire business model depended on the commodification of human attention. Because attention is not just what social media companies want. Attention is what they sell. The business model of Google, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, and essentially every major platform in the modern attention economy is advertising. These companies do not sell you a product. You are the product. Your attention, measured in minutes and hours and sessions and clicks, is the raw material that these platforms harvest and sell to advertisers. The more of your attention they can capture, the more they can charge. The more they can charge, the more they are worth. The more they are worth, the more they invest in engineering your attention more effectively. This is not a secret. It is the stated, public, legally reported business model of the most valuable corporations in the history of human civilization. In 2024, global digital advertising spending crossed the threshold of $1 trillion. $1 trillion every year paid by corporations and political organizations to place their messages in front of minds that have been specifically engineered to be receptive to those messages. And the targeting has become extraordinarily precise. Part 2. The Science of Manufacturing Belief. Before we get to the modern surveillance apparatus of digital advertising, we need to understand something older and more fundamental. We need to understand how human beings form beliefs, because the answer is far more disturbing than most people would like to admit. You believe that you form beliefs through a process of rational evaluation. You encounter information, you assess it, you compare it to other information you already have. you reach a conclusion, and that conclusion becomes a belief. This is almost entirely false. The actual cognitive science of belief formation shows a process that is almost the reverse of what I just described. In the vast majority of cases, humans form beliefs first, rapidly, intuitively, emotionally, and construct reasons for those beliefs afterward. The reasons are not the cause of the belief. They are the rationalization of a belief that was already formed through entirely different, largely unconscious processes. The psychologist Jonathan Haidt, whose moral psychology research has been enormously influential, describes this using the metaphor of the rider and the elephant. The elephant is the vast, powerful, ancient emotional and intuitive machinery of the mind. The rider is the small, relatively recent, conscious, rational faculty. We typically believe that the rider controls the elephant, that reason governs intuition. But in reality, the elephant goes where it wants, and the rider's primary function is to construct a convincing story about why that was the right direction all along. This is consistent with an enormous body of empirical research. When people are asked to explain their moral judgments, their political preferences, their consumer choices, or their social attitudes, they produce confident explanations that are, on careful examination, largely confabulations. Stories constructed after the fact that bear only a loose relationship to the actual cognitive processes that produce the judgment. The neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga's research with split-brain patients, people whose corpus callosum, the connection between the two cerebral hemispheres, had been surgically severed, revealed something extraordinary about this process. When the right hemisphere of these patients was given a command through their left visual field, and the patients acted on it, the left hemisphere, which has no access to the information that prompted the action, would nevertheless immediately generate a confident, fluent explanation of why the action had been taken. Not, "I don't know why I did that." A confident story, a narrative of intention that was, in the strictest possible sense, made up. Gazzaniga called this the interpreter, a module in the left hemisphere of the brain whose function appears to be the continuous generation of narrative explanations for behavior and experience, regardless of whether those explanations are accurate. The interpreter is not trying to deceive you. It is doing its job. Its job is narrative coherence. Its job is to produce a sense that there is a you who acts with intention, who has reasons, who is the coherent author of your own life story. But the stories it tells are not always, or even primarily, accurate accounts of what is actually happening in your brain. Why does this matter for the question of control? Because it means that the experience of forming your own beliefs through your own rational processes is, to a very significant degree, an experience that is created after the fact. The actual formation of beliefs happens through processes that are heavily influenced by emotion, repetition, social context, familiarity, and a host of other factors that operate below the level of conscious awareness. And all of those factors can be engineered. The illusory truth effect, how repetition becomes reality. In 1977, psychologists Lynn Hasher, David Goldstein and Thomas Topino published a study that established something that would become one of the most replicated findings in all of social psychology. They found that people rate statements as more likely to be true simply because they have encountered them before, not because the statements have been supported by additional evidence, not because any new reasoning has occurred, simply because of prior exposure. Mere repetition increases perceived truthfulness. This effect, which became known as the illusory truth effect, has been replicated hundreds of times across dozens of cultures, age groups, and contexts. It persists even when people are told in advance that some of the statements they are about to hear are false. It persists even for statements that contradict things people already know to be true. It persists even when the false statement is clearly labelled as false at the time it is repeated. The mechanism is cognitive fluency, the ease with which a piece of information is processed. The brain uses processing fluency as a proxy for truth. Things that are easy to process, that feel familiar, that come quickly to mind, these things feel true. Things that are effortful, unfamiliar, difficult to process, these feel uncertain, questionable. And familiarity is built by repetition. Every time you hear a claim, regardless of its accuracy, it becomes slightly more familiar, slightly more fluent, slightly more true feeling. This is not a quirk of psychology. This is the fundamental operating principle of propaganda. Hitler's propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, did not articulate the principle of the illusory truth effect in those terms. That language would not be available for decades. But the practice of the Third Reich's propaganda machinery was built entirely on repetition. The same claims, the same phrases, the same images, broadcast through every available medium at the maximum possible frequency continuously. Not because reasoning had been attempted, but because repetition is enough. Repetition, without argument, without evidence, without reason, is enough to shift what feels true. Modern research has extended this understanding considerably. A 2025 study analyzing Russian disinformation used quantitative content analysis of 260 verified texts and found consistent patterns linking repetition, emotional tone, and ambiguity to increase perceived credibility in target audiences. The researchers identified a specific technique they called cross-source fusion, the blending of credible and conspiratorial sources in a way that allows false narratives to borrow legitimacy from true ones. Belief, the researchers concluded, can be engineered through form rather than fact. Through form rather than fact. Let that land for a moment. You do not need to make a true argument to change what people believe. You need to present information with the right emotional tone through familiar and trusted-seeming channels, repeatedly with the structural features of credibility. And the brain will do the rest. The interpreter will construct the story. The belief will form. And the person who holds that belief will feel entirely certain that they arrived at it through their own reasoning. Confirmation. Bias, the mind's most powerful defense against reality. There's another cognitive process that is absolutely central to any serious discussion of how minds are controlled, and it is one that most people have heard of, but whose full implications are rarely confronted honestly. Confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the well-documented tendency to search for, favor, remember and interpret information in a way that confirms your existing beliefs. It is not a weakness of the unintelligent or the poorly educated. Multiple decades of research have shown that higher intelligence and more education, if anything, make confirmation bias more powerful rather than less, because they give people more cognitive resources with which to construct sophisticated-sounding rationalizations for beliefs they already hold. Peter Wayson's card selection task, a famous experiment first published in 1966, demonstrated that people overwhelmingly prefer to seek information that confirms their hypotheses rather than information that could falsify them, even when they are explicitly instructed to test their hypothesis rigorously. The confirmation-seeking pattern appears even in people who understand the importance of disconfirmation in principle. Understanding a bias cognitively does not reliably prevent it from operating. Lord, Ross and Lepper demonstrated in a famous 1979 study that presenting people with balanced evidence about a contested topic, where the evidence on both sides is equally strong, tends not to move them toward the center. It tends to push them further toward their original position. People process the evidence that supports their view as convincing, and the evidence that challenges it as flawed, biased, or insufficiently rigorous. The result is attitude polarization, reading the same set of facts and emerging more convinced than ever that you were right. This is the cognitive ecosystem into which social media algorithms were introduced. An algorithm designed to maximize engagement, designed to show you content that you will react to, that you will click on, that you will spend time with, will by definition learn to show you content that confirms your existing beliefs, that validates your existing emotional reactions, that makes you feel that everyone who shares your worldview is smart and correct, and that everyone who disagrees with you is stupid, corrupt, or evil. Not because the algorithm intends this, but because that is what maximizes engagement. Outrage engages. Validation engages. Challenge and complexity do not engage. Challenge and complexity cause people to leave the platform. The term filter bubble was coined by the internet activist Eli Pariser in 2011 to describe the phenomenon of personalization algorithms creating individualized information environments that progressively insulate users from viewpoints and information that contradict their existing beliefs. The term has since become common, but its full implications are still not widely understood. A filter bubble is not simply a situation where you don't hear certain opinions. A filter bubble, sustained over months and years, systematically reshapes your model of reality itself. It changes what you think is common, what you think is normal, what you think is obviously true, who you think is trustworthy, and what kinds of people you think are capable of holding reasonable positions. It is not that you stop considering opposing arguments. It is that over time you stop being able to imagine that opposing arguments exist. The research on this is consistent and alarming. MIT researchers published findings showing that false news spread 6 times faster on social media than accurate news. not because people are particularly gullible, but because false news tends to be more emotionally arousing, more surprising, more novel, and all of those properties trigger the dopamine system and make the content feel more important, more worthy of sharing. Negativity travels particularly fast because the brain has a negativity bias, a tendency rooted in evolutionary history to prioritize threats over opportunities, to attend to danger more than safety. A threat to your group, your identity, your worldview, your safety. These capture attention powerfully, and they are extraordinarily easy to manufacture. Part 3. The corporations and their tools. Let us now turn from the general principles of how your mind can be influenced to the specific institutional actors who are currently doing so, and the specific tools they are using. We will begin with advertising, because advertising is both the most economically significant form of mental influence in the modern world and the one that most people understand least accurately. Most people, when they think about advertising, think of television commercials and billboards and banner ads, and think of themselves as essentially immune to them. I know they're trying to sell me something, so it doesn't work on me. This is one of the most persistent and most dangerous misconceptions in all of modern psychology. The science of advertising has never, for a single moment, relied on conscious persuasion. The goal of effective advertising has never been to present a rational argument that you consciously evaluate and find convincing. The goal has always been to work on the unconscious, to build associations, to trigger emotions, to create feelings of familiarity and trust and desire that operate below the threshold of conscious awareness, and then express themselves as choices that feel entirely free and spontaneous. Neuromarketing, the application of neuroscience to the understanding and optimization of advertising and consumer behavior, has grown into a multi-billion-dollar industry. In 2023, the global neuromarketing market was valued at over $1.5 billion, and it is projected to reach $3.5 billion by 2032. Major corporations, including Coca-Cola, Frito-Lay, Unilever, Toyota, and dozens of others, have used fMRI brain scanning and EEG monitoring to test advertising materials on consumer brains before committing to spending those materials in the market. Coca-Cola used brain scans to determine that consumers responded more strongly, at a neurological level, to their iconic red and white branding compared to competitors. They used this finding to make their logo more prominent in all their communications, which contributed to measurable increases in market share. Frito-Lay used brain imaging to identify the specific emotional triggers associated with snack preferences, then redesigned their packaging and advertising campaigns based on those findings. The consumer was not consulted. The consumer's conscious preferences were, in a meaningful sense, irrelevant. What was consulted was the consumer's brain. Harvard Business School has stated plainly that the core premise of neuromarketing is that emotions govern purchasing decisions more than rational thought. Eye-tracking technology is used to determine exactly where your eyes go when you look at a product display, a web page, or a television commercial, where your attention goes without your conscious direction. Facial coding analyzes micro-expressions to determine your emotional response to stimuli at a resolution below what you can consciously detect or report. These tools provide, the Harvard researchers note, something that traditional market research cannot: a true, unbiased response to advertising, because people may not always tell the truth in focus groups, or they say things they think others want to hear. Neuromarketing, in other words, was explicitly developed to bypass the biases of self-report, to get at what people actually respond to, as opposed to what people think they respond to or what they are willing to admit to responding to. This is not a hidden secret. It is discussed openly in business schools, in industry publications, and in the corporate strategies of the largest consumer goods companies in the world. The brain's limbic system, the collection of ancient structures deep in the brain that govern emotional responses, fear, reward, and social bonding, influences consumer choices far more powerfully than the rational prefrontal cortex, and everyone in the advertising industry knows this. The entire industry has known it for decades. The difference now is that the tools for measuring limbic responses and optimizing messages to trigger them have become extraordinarily precise, cheap, fast, and scalable. Subliminal advertising, the embedding of stimuli below the threshold of conscious perception, has a more complicated scientific history. The famous 1957 claim by James Vickery that he had increased Coca-Cola and popcorn sales by flashing "Drink Coca-Cola and eat popcorn" subliminally during a movie screening was a fabrication. Vickery later admitted he had invented the data. And the simplistic version of subliminal advertising, flash a message too fast to be consciously seen and the viewer will immediately comply, does not work. However, more sophisticated versions of subliminal priming do work under specific conditions. Research published in peer-reviewed journals has demonstrated that subliminal exposure to brand names can influence choices in ways that depend on the current motivational state of the viewer. A study using EEG technology found that subliminal smiling face emojis embedded in hotel videos significantly affected consumers' hotel selection and produced measurable differences in theta and beta brainwave patterns. The effects are real, they are measurable, and they are being exploited. Not through the crude, single-frame flash of the Vickery myth, but through the sophisticated, sustained, multi-channel, emotionally calibrated immersion of modern brand experience. Every time you hear the sound of a Coca-Cola bottle opening, that specific, designed, tested sound, your brain is receiving a stimulus that was engineered by teams of sensory marketing specialists to activate specific emotional associations and specific memories. Every time you smell the specific scent pumped into a retail environment, a practice so common it has its own name, scent marketing, your olfactory system is sending signals directly to the limbic system, bypassing the rational cortex almost entirely. Every time you see certain colors, hear certain musical keys, encounter certain words in certain combinations, you are being influenced at a neurological level that your conscious mind cannot fully monitor or defend against. And all of this, all of the neuromarketing research, all of the sensory manipulation, all of the emotional targeting was conducted before the advent of the modern digital surveillance apparatus. Before platforms had the ability to track every click, every scroll, every pause, every search, every purchase, every conversation, every location. Before artificial intelligence could analyze behavioral data at population scale and derive psychological profiles of extraordinary precision. Part 4. The Surveillance Economy and the Psychographic Profile. In 2018, the world learned about a company called Cambridge Analytica. The revelations that this company had harvested the personal data of approximately 87 million Facebook users without their consent and used that data to build psychographic profiles for targeted political advertising became one of the most significant privacy scandals in the history of the Internet. But the scandal, as important as it was, obscured a more fundamental truth. Cambridge Analytica was not a uniquely bad actor doing something that the industry did not otherwise do. Cambridge Analytica was a company that got caught doing at larger scale and with less legal cover what the rest of the surveillance economy does every single day at much larger scale, with full legal cover, and with the explicit and informed participation of governments, corporations, and the platforms themselves. The surveillance economy, a term developed by Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff in her landmark 2019 book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, describes a new economic logic in which the raw material for production is not human labor, but human experience. Every click you make, every search you conduct, every product you look at, every place you go, every person you call, everything you say out loud within earshot of a device that has a microphone, all of it is captured, stored, analyzed, and sold, not just to show you relevant ads, to build predictive models that can, with remarkable accuracy, determine your psychological state, your vulnerabilities, your susceptibility to specific kinds of messages, and the precise conditions under which you will take specific actions. The 5-ocean model, also known as the Big Five personality model, describes 5 major dimensions of personality: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Research by Michal Kosinski at Cambridge University's Psychometric Center demonstrated that Facebook likes could predict these personality dimensions with remarkable accuracy, more accurately in some dimensions than the people's own friends or family members. 250 likes was sufficient to build a personality profile more accurate than the person's spouse. With enough behavioral data, which every major platform now has, in quantities that dwarf what Kosinski studied, it is possible to determine not just broad personality traits, but highly specific psychological characteristics. Your susceptibility to certain kinds of emotional appeal, your response to authority versus peer pressure, your triggers for anxiety and the categories of content that are most likely to move you from anxiety to action, your social identity salience and the narratives about that identity that resonate most deeply. This is what Cambridge Analytica claimed to be doing with their Ocean profiling and micro-targeting. What the major platforms are doing is more sophisticated by several orders of magnitude, because the data they have is not a research sample of 87 million people. It is 5 billion people. It has been collected continuously across years and even decades. It encompasses not just what you explicitly post or like, but the implicit signals of your attention. What you paused on, what you scrolled past quickly, what made you come back, what made you put your phone down. In 2025, the average person checks their phone 352 times daily. Each of those 352 interactions is a data point. Over a year, that is over 128,000 data points from a single person's phone interactions alone. Over a decade, over 1 million. Analyzed by machine learning systems that can detect patterns invisible to human analysts. Assembled into a model of you that is, in certain respects, more complete than your own self-knowledge. Because the platforms know things about you that you don't know about yourself. They know which kinds of content make you anxious. They know which kinds of content you claim to dislike but continue to consume. They know the precise time of day when your impulse control is at its lowest. They know the emotional state you are likely to be in based on your recent behavioral patterns. And they use all of that information to decide what to put in front of you next. The algorithm. As editor, who decides what reality looks like? Until very recently in human history, the question of what information a person was exposed to was determined by a combination of physical geography, social class, professional choices, and personal effort. If you wanted information, you had to seek it. The information you received was shaped by your community, your institutions, your cultural context, all of which were imperfect and often deeply biased, but which were at least subject to social negotiation and collective correction. Today, for over 5 billion people, the primary filter between them and the information environment is an algorithm, a machine. A system that has no interest in their intellectual development, their psychological health, their civic capacity, or their understanding of reality. A system whose only optimization target is engagement, the maximization of time spent, clicks made, reactions produced. This is not a small thing. This is arguably the most significant transformation in the human information environment since the invention of the printing press. And unlike the printing press, which expanded access to information and over centuries contributed to the Reformation, the scientific revolution, and democratic governance, the algorithmic editor appears, based on current evidence, to be moving humanity in a different direction. A 2023 meta-analysis published in MIT Research found that negative news spreads 6 times faster than positive news on social media. A 2024 fMRI study found that anxious individuals spent 35% longer on negative posts and showed 20% stronger dopamine-related activity in response to that content. A 2024 simulation study found that negative posts were shared 2.5 times more often than positive posts in algorithmically managed feeds. Algorithms that optimize for engagement will therefore inevitably and automatically amplify negative, threatening, outrage-generating content. Not because the engineers intended this, but because fear and anger are more engaging than hope and calm, and the algorithm has no other criterion. A 2024 report from the American Psychological Association found that 65% of adults reported stress from online news consumption. They are stressed because the information environment they inhabit has been systematically optimized to keep them stressed, because stress is engaging and engagement is revenue. The political implications of this are enormous. When the algorithm decides what political information you see, when it decides which politicians and movements and policy debates are visible to you, when it decides which kinds of emotional framings of political issues are presented to you most frequently, it is, in a meaningful sense, shaping your political reality. It is doing so not through any political agenda of its own, but through a straightforward optimization process that happens to have the side effect of making politics more extreme, more emotional, more tribal, and more disconnected from the kind of deliberative reasoning that democratic theory assumes citizens will engage in. AI-powered tools, including deepfakes, bots, and algorithms, have evolved conventional propaganda strategies into intricate and widespread media manipulation systems. And this evolution has not stopped. As of 2026, we are watching these tools operate at scale in real political systems around the world. Evidence from the 2024 to 2025 electoral cycle shows how AI systems optimize content for maximum emotional impact across multiple countries. A study from 2024 found that young voters on TikTok were regularly exposed to misleading political content, including AI-generated and fabricated videos of political leaders. And the presence of such content alongside genuine posts made it harder for users to distinguish parody from fact in fast-moving, short-form social feeds. Deepfakes have crossed a critical threshold in 2026. They have improved and eliminated earlier telltale glitches and are now accessible to anyone with a smartphone. Think about that. A deepfake, a synthetic video of a real person saying or doing something they never said or did, indistinguishable from real footage, now requires only a smartphone to create. And it takes 30 seconds to create and 30 seconds to share to hundreds of millions of people. And the brain, which evolved to trust the evidence of its own senses, is poorly equipped to resist it. Part 5. The Political Mind and the Machinery of Consent. The manufacturing of political consent is not a new phenomenon. Walter Lippmann, writing in his 1922 book Public Opinion, argued that modern democracy requires the management of public opinion by educated elites, because the complexity of modern society exceeds the cognitive capacity of ordinary citizens to navigate it without guidance. Edward Bernays, the founder of modern public relations and a nephew of Sigmund Freud, argued in his 1928 book Propaganda, he used the word approvingly, that the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses was an important element in democratic society. "We are governed," Bernays wrote. "Our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of." Bernays was not describing something that might happen. He was describing what he personally did professionally. He ran a campaign in 1929, commissioned by the American Tobacco Company, to break the social taboo against women smoking in public. He hired women to smoke cigarettes at the New York Easter Parade, describing them publicly as torches of freedom, linking smoking to the suffragette movement and to women's liberation. Within years, tobacco companies had opened an entirely new market. The health consequences of smoking cigarettes, which were at that point becoming increasingly apparent to medical researchers, were nowhere in the conversation. The campaign was a pure exercise in the engineering of cultural meaning, attaching a product to a pre-existing emotional framework of freedom and liberation, bypassing any rational evaluation of what the product actually was. This technique, anchoring a product or idea to powerful pre-existing emotional frameworks, to values and identities that people already hold deeply, is still the foundational principle of political communication. It is not about policy arguments. It is not about evidence, it's about finding the emotional wire that is already live in the target audience and running current through it. Fear is the most reliably live wire. Threats to in-group identity, to the nation, to the tribe, to the culture, to the faith, to the way of life, activate the amygdala powerfully and reliably across cultures and political contexts. Once the amygdala is engaged, reasoning becomes harder. Research has consistently shown that when people are primed with threat information, they become more authoritarian in their political preferences, more willing to cede individual liberties in exchange for security, more hostile to outgroups, more supportive of aggressive responses to perceived threats. This is not a cynical interpretation. This is consistently replicated experimental psychology. The political consultant Roger Ailes, who built the Fox News channel, understood this intuitively. Ailes had a principle that he articulated privately as the threat and fear model. The idea that the most reliable way to keep a television audience engaged was to keep them afraid, and the most reliable way to keep them afraid was to find threats and potential threats in every news cycle and present them through the most emotionally arousing framing possible. Fox News did not invent this. All media organizations that operate on an advertising model have an incentive to optimize for emotional engagement. Fox News simply pursued this logic more consistently and more ruthlessly than its competitors. But Fox News, powerful as it was still broadcasting to everyone who tuned in. It could not target individuals based on their specific psychological profiles. It could not adjust its message in real time based on what was producing the strongest emotional response in specific demographic segments. Digital political advertising can and does do all of these things. Micro-targeted political advertising, the delivery of specifically tailored political messages to individuals based on detailed psychographic profiles, became a major tool in political campaigns following the 2012 Obama campaign, which pioneered data-driven voter targeting. By 2016, the technology had advanced considerably. By 2020, it had become the primary vehicle for political persuasion. By 2024, artificial intelligence was being used to generate and test thousands of variations of political messaging in real time, with algorithms determining which versions were most effective at producing specific emotional responses and specific behaviors in specific voter segments. This is not influence at the level of public argument. This is influence at the level of individual psychology, calibrated to individual vulnerability. Different voters are shown different things, receive different emotional framings of the same candidates and issues, are exposed to different versions of reality. All of it engineered by systems that have studied their behavioral data and know with considerable precision what will move them and how. In 2025, propaganda doesn't shout. It whispers in your voice. The echo chamber and the epistemic crisis. The combination of confirmation bias, algorithmic filtering, micro-targeted content, and the emotional amplification of algorithmically selected information has produced what many researchers now describe as an epistemic crisis, a crisis of knowledge itself. Not just a situation where people disagree about politics, but a situation where citizens in the same society literally inhabit different informational realities, where the concept of shared facts, shared evidence, shared standards of truth has substantially broken down. There is a technical term for the social process through which this happens. It is called group polarization. Group polarization is the well-replicated finding that when people who share a pre-existing tendency discuss that tendency among themselves, their collective position moves to a more extreme version of the original tendency. This is not merely that agreement reinforces agreement. Structured social interaction among like-minded people actively moves the group toward more extreme positions, more confident, less qualified, less open to evidence that might suggest doubt. Social media platforms, with their algorithmic recommendation systems and their network structures that tend to connect like-minded users, are machines for generating group polarization at civilizational scale. The filter bubbles described by Eli Pariser are not just individual phenomena. They are the building blocks of mutually incomprehensible political tribes whose members share not just opinions, but fundamentally different informational environments, different media diets, different trusted sources, different understandings of what has happened and what is true. The 2025 World Economic Forum Global Risks Report identified misinformation and disinformation as the #1 global risk, above climate change, above economic instability, above conflict. Not because false information is new, but because the infrastructure for generating, disseminating, and amplifying it at scale, with unprecedented targeting precision, with AI-generated content indistinguishable from real content, has reached a level of sophistication that no pre-existing social institution, journalism, education, law, was designed to contend with. Part 6. The governments that watch you. Everything we have discussed so far has been primarily about the commercial exploitation of human cognition. But no discussion of who controls your mind can be complete without confronting the role of governments, both in surveilling populations and in actively shaping the beliefs of their own citizens. The revelations made by Edward Snowden in 2013 established beyond any reasonable doubt that the surveillance apparatus of democratic governments, particularly the United States National Security Agency and its partners in the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, had constructed technical capabilities to collect and store the communications of essentially every person on Earth with access to a phone or internet connection. Mass surveillance of an entire planetary population, not in secret from the political leadership, with their full knowledge and authorization. The legal frameworks used to authorize this surveillance were largely secret, interpreted by secret courts, immune to public scrutiny or judicial challenge by those being surveilled. The Snowden revelations produced significant legal and political reform in some jurisdictions. They did not end mass surveillance. They moved it, refined it, and in many cases expanded it. In authoritarian states, the situation is qualitatively more extreme. China's social credit system, which aggregates behavioral, financial, legal and social data about citizens to generate scores that determine access to services, travel, education and economic opportunity, represents the most comprehensive attempt in history to use data-driven behavioral monitoring as an instrument of social control. As of the most recent data available, the system has been used to block citizens from taking millions of flights and high-speed train journeys on the basis of algorithmic assessments of their social creditworthiness. The system does not need secret police or gulags. It controls behavior through the automated application of consequences, through the subtle, pervasive, ever-present influence of the knowledge that you are being watched and scored. The psychologist Michel Foucault, writing in the 1970s about the architecture of power and surveillance, analyzed Jeremy Bentham's panopticon, a prison design in which a single guard could theoretically observe all prisoners at all times, and in which the prisoner's awareness of this potential observation was sufficient to make them regulate their own behavior, even when no one was actually watching. Foucault argued that the power of surveillance lay not in the act of watching, but in the internalization of the possibility of being watched, the self-regulation that awareness of observation produces. He was describing a prison. He was inadvertently describing the future of the Internet. The difference is that the panopticon was a metaphor and a theory. Modern digital surveillance is real, functional and operating at a scale that no political philosopher of the 18th century could have imagined. And it is not just governments that operate it. It is corporations. It is advertisers. It is employers who routinely screen job candidates' social media histories and who, in some industries, monitor employees' digital communications continuously. It is insurance companies. It is credit agencies. The surveillance is total, the surveillors are multiple, and the data they collect flows between all of them in ways that individual citizens cannot monitor or control. Part 7. The Cognitive Weapons. There is a category of influence operation that sits somewhere between commercial persuasion and political propaganda, and that has become, in the past decade, one of the most significant tools of interstate conflict and societal destabilization. It has many names, but the one most commonly used in contemporary security research is cognitive warfare. Cognitive warfare is the use of information, narrative, and psychological techniques specifically designed to undermine the target population's ability to reason clearly, to trust their institutions, to form coherent collective judgments, or to take effective collective action. It is not propaganda in the sense of simply promoting one side's narrative. It is the systematic corruption of the epistemic environment itself, the sowing of confusion, doubt, and cynicism so pervasive that the target population loses confidence in the possibility of shared truth. NATO's Collaborative Support Office published analysis in 2022 defining cognitive warfare as targeting the cognitive domain, the cognitive processes that underlie perception, judgment, and decision-making, as a theatre of military and strategic operation. It is, in this framing, not simply an extension of information warfare. It is a direct assault on the human capacity for collective sense-making. The strategy is not to make people believe specific false things. It is to make people unable to believe anything. To produce what the political theorist Hannah Arendt, analyzing totalitarianism, described as a situation where people no longer trust their own senses, no longer maintain certainty about any shared reality, and therefore become dependent on authority for their sense of what is true. Arendt was describing the mass propaganda apparatus of fascism and Stalinism. Current researchers in cognitive security see the same dynamics operating through digital information environments. Russian information operations, which have been studied extensively by researchers at Oxford University, Stanford University, and multiple European security agencies, have been found to operate not primarily by promoting specifically Russian-favored narratives, but by amplifying existing divisions, both sidesing every controversy, promoting cynicism about democratic institutions, and creating an informational environment in which the very concept of a trustworthy source appears untenable. The goal is not to win the argument. The goal is to make argument itself seem pointless. This is cognitive warfare at the social level. And it is extraordinarily effective because it exploits cognitive processes that are inherent to the human mind, not weaknesses of any particular ideology or demographic, but universal features of how minds process information under conditions of uncertainty, threat, and information overload. The emotional architecture of radicalization. One of the most thoroughly documented and deeply alarming aspects of the modern digital information environment is its role in facilitating the radicalization of individuals into extremist beliefs and, in some cases, into violence. This is not a peripheral phenomenon. This is a process that has been documented in dozens of countries across ideological spectrums, producing consequences that include mass political violence, genocidal incitement, and the normalization of previously marginal extremist ideologies. The pathway to radicalization, as described in the extensive research literature, is not typically a sudden conversion. It is a gradual escalation, a progression through increasingly extreme content, facilitated and accelerated by algorithmic recommendation systems that have no concept of where the content they are serving leads. YouTube's recommendation algorithm, which for years drove approximately 70% of all viewing time on the platform, was observed by researchers, journalists, and the platform's own engineers to have a consistent tendency toward what became known as radicalization pipelines. Sequences of recommended videos that began with mainstream political content and progressively escalated through a series of individually small steps to content promoting extremist and sometimes openly violent ideologies. Each step in the escalation was generated by the same optimization logic. What will keep this person watching next? What will produce the most emotional engagement? The algorithm did not intend to radicalize anyone. It was simply following its objective function, and its objective function happened to align with the psychological mechanisms of radicalization. The emotional architecture of radicalization is well understood in the research literature. It begins with grievance, a real or perceived injustice, humiliation or threat. The grievance activates the threat response and the desire for agency, for the ability to change the situation. A radicalizing narrative then offers an explanation for the grievance, an identified enemy, a specific cause, a group to blame, which provides the cognitive clarity and emotional relief of having someone to be angry at. The narrative then offers an identity, membership in a group of people who understand the truth, who are awake to the real situation, who are morally superior to the deceived masses. And finally, the narrative offers a solution, an action, a mission, a struggle that promises to convert the helplessness of victimhood into the agency of heroism. Every element of this architecture can be found in the content that algorithmic recommendation systems reliably surface for vulnerable individuals. The grievance is validated and amplified. The enemy is identified and demonized. The in-group identity is cultivated and celebrated. And the proposed solution, however extreme, is framed as the only rational response to the magnitude of the threat. Part 8. The body as target. What stress does to the believing brain. There is a biological dimension to the question of who controls your mind that is frequently overlooked in discussions of persuasion, propaganda, and algorithmic manipulation. It is this: the brain that is under chronic stress is a significantly different organ from the brain that is not. And the brain under chronic stress is far more susceptible to the kinds of influence and manipulation we have been discussing. Cortisol, the primary stress hormone in the human body, has profound effects on the brain when chronically elevated. It impairs the function of the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for critical thinking, rational evaluation, impulse control, and the integration of emotional reactions with deliberate reasoning. It enhances the reactivity of the amygdala, the alarm center of the brain, responsible for threat detection, fear responses, and the rapid automatic categorization of people and situations as safe or dangerous. Chronic stress, in neurobiological terms, increases your emotional reactivity while decreasing your capacity for rational reflection, a combination that makes you far more vulnerable to messages based on fear, outrage, and tribal identity. Now consider the fact that a 2024 American Psychological Association report found that 65% of American adults reported chronic stress from online news consumption. Consider that the algorithmic information environment has been systematically optimized to maximize emotional arousal, which means maximizing fear and outrage content. Consider that this stress is continuous, 352 phone checks a day, a constant drip of threat information, a never-ending scroll through algorithmically curated anxiety. The biological result of all of this is a population whose prefrontal cortices are chronically impaired and whose amygdalae are chronically hyperactivated. A population that is, in the most literal neurobiological sense, less capable of the kind of reasoning that resistance to manipulation requires. This is not a coincidence. It may not be an intention. But the incentive structures of the attention economy produce this result as reliably as if it had been designed. The platforms profit from your anxiety. Your anxiety impairs your capacity for critical reasoning. Your impaired critical reasoning makes you more vulnerable to emotional manipulation. Your vulnerability to emotional manipulation makes you more likely to engage with the emotionally charged content the platforms serve you. The loop is closed. The loop has no exit that the platform itself provides. Part 9. The architecture of identity control. Of all the mechanisms of mental influence we have discussed, there is one that deserves extended treatment because it's both the most powerful and the most consistently overlooked in popular discussions. It is identity. Human beings are social animals. Our evolutionary history as primates who lived in small groups, whose survival depended on membership in a community, has produced a brain that is exquisitely sensitive to signals of belonging and exclusion, acceptance and rejection, in-group and out-group. The desire to belong, to be seen as a full and valued member of one's group, is not a peripheral desire. It is among the most fundamental motivational structures of human psychology. Neuroscience has shown that social exclusion activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Belonging is, to the brain, a survival need. Political movements, ideological communities, religious organizations, consumer brands, all of them have discovered through practice, if not always through explicit theory, that the most powerful form of influence is not the argument addressed to the individual's reason. It is the identity claim addressed to the individual's need to belong. You are not being persuaded to believe something. You are being invited to become someone, a member of a community of people who believe this, who share this worldview, who recognize each other as allies and the others as enemies. Once an idea becomes part of your identity, once you believe it not just as a proposition you hold, but as a feature of who you are, it becomes extraordinarily resistant to revision. This is because revising the idea would require not just updating a belief, but changing the self. It would require, at least momentarily, belonging nowhere, being neither the person you were, nor the person the new belief would make you. The psychological cost of identity change is enormous, and the brain resists it with powerful motivated reasoning, selectively processing evidence to protect the existing identity and dismissing challenges as attacks rather than engaging with them as arguments. Political branding is explicitly identity branding. Make America Great Again was not a policy proposal. It was an identity construction, a narrative of a group of people who understood something others didn't, who shared a vision of what had been lost and what could be recovered, who were defined in large part by who they were not. Every successful political movement in the modern era operates on the same principle. The content of the ideology is secondary to the identity it offers. The identity is primary, and once the identity is established, the content will be defended not as a matter of evidence, but as a matter of self. Social media accelerates and intensifies this process because it provides continuous real-time feedback on your identity performance. Every post you make is a signal to your in-group of your belonging. Every like, every share, every supportive comment is a validation of your identity. Every hostile response from the out-group is a confirmation of your distinctness from them, a reinforcement of the boundary between us and them. The social rewards of performing your political identity on social media, the belonging, the validation, the sense of being seen and recognized by your tribe, are psychologically very powerful, and they are entirely independent of whether any of the content you are performing your identity through has any relationship to reality. Part 10. The children. Nothing in this entire picture is more alarming than its effects on children. The human brain does not finish developing until the mid-20s. The prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for impulse control, long-term planning, consequence evaluation, and the regulation of emotional reactions, is the last region of the brain to mature. In adolescence, it is still under construction. The limbic system, the emotional and reward circuitry, is fully active. The regulatory system that would allow considered, deliberate response to emotional stimuli is not. This neurological reality means that adolescents are, by the basic facts of their brain development, significantly more vulnerable to exactly the kinds of influences we have been describing. More vulnerable to the dopamine hijacking of social media. More vulnerable to the identity manipulation of online communities. More sensitive to social rejection and acceptance signals. Less capable of the critical, reflective reasoning that would allow them to recognize and resist manipulation. A 2023 study from the University of North Carolina found that habitual checking of social media physically alters the developing brain in young adolescents, changing the structure and functional connectivity of regions involved in reward processing, social cognition, and emotional regulation. These are not temporary changes. They are structural alterations in a developing organ, changes that will shape the brain's architecture and therefore the person's cognitive and emotional life for decades. 81% of teenagers report anxiety when they cannot check social media. Research at UNC found that adolescents who habitually checked social media showed heightened sensitivity to social rewards and punishments, a pattern that, in clinical terms, resembles a vulnerability to anxiety, depression, and addictive behaviors. These children did not choose this outcome. The platforms that produced it, using the full arsenal of behavioral neuroscience and machine learning, had known for years, through their own internal research, that they were causing measurable harm to the developing brains of children. They chose not to stop. Part 11. The Awakening. Can the mind reclaim itself? We have spent a great deal of this investigation in very dark territory, and we have done so deliberately, because the darkness is real, and because soft-pedaling it would be one more act of the information management we have been examining throughout. But this is not a story without agency. The human mind, the very organ that all of these forces are working to exploit, is also the organ that produced the science that makes all of this visible. And visibility is the beginning of resistance. Let us be precise about what resistance means and does not mean. Resistance does not mean disengaging from all technology and retreating to a cabin in the woods. That option is available to almost no one and is not a solution to a civilizational problem. Resistance does not mean becoming paranoid, believing that every piece of information you encounter is manipulation, that no source is trustworthy, that reality itself is inaccessible. That response, in fact, is one of the intended outcomes of cognitive warfare. The goal of destabilization is to produce exactly that. A population so confused about what is true that it gives up on the project of knowing and becomes entirely dependent on authority. What resistance means, in the most practically grounded terms, is a specific set of cognitive habits, institutional structures and social practices that operate against the grain of the attention economy and the manipulation architecture. It is difficult work. It is work that goes against the path of least resistance at every step. But the scientific literature gives us genuine, replicable, evidence-based tools. The first and most foundational tool is metacognition, the capacity to think about your own thinking. Not as a one-time exercise, but as a continuous practice. The question is not just, what do I believe, but why do I believe it? What evidence do I have? How was I exposed to this information? What emotional state was I in when I encountered it? What would I need to see to change my mind? This sounds simple. It is not. It requires the repeated, effortful activation of the prefrontal cortex against the much faster, much more powerful, much more automatic, emotional and identity-based processing of the limbic system. It requires the willingness to entertain the possibility that the most confident, most emotionally compelling things you believe may be the things most worth examining. Because the most confident, most emotionally compelling beliefs are precisely the ones that the manipulation architecture most reliably produces. The second tool is deliberate diversification of information sources. Not the comfortable kind of diversification where you read publications that broadly agree with you but differ in style, but the genuinely uncomfortable kind, seeking out the strongest arguments made by people whose fundamental premises and values are different from yours, made by sources with genuine epistemic independence from the media ecosystem you normally inhabit. Not to capitulate to those arguments, but to ensure that your own beliefs have been formed in contact with genuine alternatives rather than constructed in the echo chamber that algorithms provide. The third tool is physical, literally. The research is consistent that reducing exposure to the chronic stress of the algorithmic information environment has measurable positive effects on prefrontal function and therefore on the quality of reasoning. Research from the University of Pennsylvania found that limiting social media to 30 minutes per day produces significant reductions in loneliness, depression and anxiety. 30 minutes per day versus the current average of several hours per day. The gap between those numbers represents thousands of hours per year of prefrontal impairment. The fourth tool is the cultivation of slow, deliberate engagement with complex information. The kind of engagement that books, long-form journalism and extended conversation produce, as opposed to the rapid-fire, superficial processing that social media feeds require. There is a reason why the ability to maintain sustained attention on a single complex subject, to read a long book, to follow a sustained argument, to sit with uncertainty without the relief of an immediate answer, feels increasingly difficult. It is because the attention system is a trainable organ, and years of training in rapid, fragmented, reward-seeking attention has made sustained, deep focus harder. It can be retrained, but it requires practice, and the practice is effortful, and the algorithm will always offer you an easier alternative. The fifth and perhaps most important tool is collective. The mechanisms of mental control we have been examining operate most powerfully on isolated individuals. Strong social communities built around shared practices, shared values, face-to-face interaction, genuine mutual knowledge, provide a kind of epistemic protection that no individual cognitive defense can match. When you're embedded in a community of people who know you, who engage with you in person, who represent a range of viewpoints and a grounded common reality, the manufactured communities of the algorithmic filter bubble are less able to substitute for that reality. Human connection, real, embodied, imperfect, inconvenient human connection is one of the most powerful protective factors against the manipulation of isolated minds. The institutions and the law. Individual resistance, necessary as it is, cannot be the whole answer. The forces that exploit human cognition operate at civilizational scale and are backed by trillions of dollars and the most sophisticated technology ever developed. Individual cognitive hygiene, however diligently practiced, is insufficient to address a systemic problem. Systemic problems require systemic solutions. The European Union's Digital Services Act, which entered into force in 2024 for major platforms, represents the most significant legislative attempt to date to regulate the attention economy. It requires platforms above certain user thresholds to conduct systematic risk assessments of their algorithmic systems' effects on public health, civic discourse, and the rights of minors. It imposes obligations of transparency on algorithmic recommendation systems. It prohibits certain forms of targeting that exploit psychological vulnerabilities. It is a serious piece of legislation, imperfectly implemented and facing significant enforcement challenges, but it represents a genuine attempt by a major democratic jurisdiction to treat algorithmic influence as a matter of public concern, rather than purely private commercial activity. In the United States, regulatory progress has been slower, blocked by a combination of First Amendment doctrine, which in its current interpretation provides broad constitutional protection to algorithmic editorial decisions, and intense lobbying by the platform companies whose combined Washington lobbying expenditures run into the hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and its various proposed amendments represent the most politically viable avenue for near-term regulation, reflecting the fact that the exploitation of children's neurological vulnerabilities may be the single most galvanizing issue for legislative action. The question of what a genuinely healthy information ecology would look like, one that serves human cognitive flourishing rather than exploiting it, one that operates on values beyond engagement maximization, is, and a serious, substantive, actively debated question in technology ethics, political philosophy, and public policy. There are no easy answers. Any regulatory system stringent enough to seriously change the incentive structures of the attention economy will face powerful legal and commercial resistance. Any system weak enough to avoid that resistance is unlikely to produce meaningful change. This is the central political problem of our technological moment. Part 12, the present moment and the question that remains. Let us return to where we began. Right now, as you process this, your brain is doing something extraordinary. It is not just receiving information. It is constructing meaning. It is integrating new information with existing networks of association, belief, identity, and emotional history. It is running pattern-matching algorithms more sophisticated than anything that any technology company has yet managed to build. It is simultaneously emotional and rational, unconscious and conscious, ancient and modern, shaped by evolution and by culture and by the specific, unrepeatable history of your individual life. All of that complexity is what the forces we have been discussing are trying to shape, to steer, to control. And the fact that they have developed extraordinarily powerful tools for doing so does not mean they have succeeded completely. It means the contest is real. It means the stakes are high. It means you are not imagining it. The human brain, it turns out, is not passive. It is not a vessel waiting to be filled. It is an active, creative, adaptive organ that, when given accurate information about how it is being exploited, can develop genuine resistance. The prefrontal cortex can override the amygdala. The metacognitive capacity for self-reflection can interrupt automatic and conditioned responses. The social capacity for genuine community can resist manufactured tribalism. These are not metaphors. These are documented, measurable, replicable capacities of the human mind. But here is the honest conclusion that the evidence demands. The forces working to control your mind are not abstract. They are not theoretical. They are not future dangers to be prepared for. They are operating right now in the device in your pocket, in the platform you will check before you go to sleep tonight, in the advertisements served to you based on a psychographic profile that is more detailed than anything a human analyst could construct, in the news feed that has been algorithmically calibrated to produce the precise emotional state most likely to maximize your engagement. They are operating in the political messaging that has been tested against your specific psychological profile and refined based on your behavioral responses. They are operating in the media environment that has been systematically optimized to keep you anxious, outraged and tribal because those states produce the most clicks. The people who built these systems are not all villains. Many of them genuinely believed, and some still believe, that they were building tools that would connect the world, that would spread democracy, that would give voice to the voiceless. Some of them have spent years trying to undo or mitigate what they helped create. But the systems they built have their own logic, their own incentive structures, their own momentum. And that logic, those incentives, that momentum, are not oriented toward human flourishing. They're oriented toward engagement, retention, growth, and revenue. This is the world you live in. This is the information environment in which your beliefs are formed, your identity is shaped, your political reality is constructed, and your attention is spent. Not in the 19th century, when the technologies of manipulation were cruder and slower. Now, in 2026, with artificial intelligence generating realistic synthetic content at the touch of a screen, with deepfakes now indistinguishable from reality to the naked eye and the unaided ear, with behavioral profiling systems that know more about your psychological vulnerabilities than your closest friends, with recommendation algorithms that have spent millions of compute hours learning exactly how to keep you watching, scrolling, clicking, reacting. Who controls your mind? The honest answer is, right now, many things do, and most of them are not you. But the more important answer is, that can change. Not fully. The unconscious will always operate below your awareness. The emotional architecture of the human mind will always be susceptible to some degree to skilled manipulation. The social drives for belonging and identity will always create vulnerabilities. But the degree of control that external forces exercise over your beliefs, your attention, your emotional life, and your sense of reality is not fixed. It is a variable. And the things that move that variable, accurate knowledge of how the manipulation works, deliberate cognitive practices that activate your reflective capacity, genuine human connection that grounds your sense of reality, political and institutional action that changes the incentive structures of the attention economy. These are all things that exist, that work, that have been studied and measured and documented. The question of who controls your mind is, in the end, not purely a scientific question. It is a question about what kind of person you want to be and what kind of world you want to live in. It is a question about whether you are willing to do the difficult work of actually thinking, slowly, effortfully, against the grain of every incentive the digital environment provides, rather than simply experiencing the sensation of thinking while the deeper machinery of manipulation does its work below your awareness. Every major institution in the history of human civilization, religion, philosophy, science, education, art, has, at its best, been an attempt to help human beings think more clearly, feel more deeply, and understand their place in reality more accurately. The digital revolution, at its best, promise to extend and democratize those capacities. At its current worst, it is doing the opposite, narrowing attention, deepening tribalism, amplifying manipulation, degrading the shared epistemic commons that makes collective self-governance possible. The choice between those two trajectories is not made by algorithms or corporations or governments alone. It is made in aggregate by billions of individual human beings, making billions of individual decisions about how to spend their attention, what to believe, who to trust, and how to engage with the extraordinary, terrifying, beautiful complexity of the world they share. Your mind is the most important thing you have. It is the medium through which you experience everything. Love, beauty, meaning, purpose, truth. It is the instrument through which you participate in the collective construction of the world that every future generation will inherit. Knowing who is trying to control it is not the end of the story. It is the beginning.